This episode is sponsored by Ren. In 2012, a box of Twinkies sold for over $250,000. But it wasn't just because of its delicious cream filling. You see, Twinkies were a godsend to Americans in the 1920s. They saved people from a nuclear war. Despite that, the history of Twinkies is far from being sweet. The company would face many obstacles, including filing bankruptcy twice, employees striking against them, and much more. What happened to America's beloved sponge cake? To answer that question, we'll have to take a trip back to Twinkies' incredible history, starting in 1920. The story of Twinkie begins with a man and a wagon. James A. Dewar was a wagon driver for the Continental Baking Company. Every day, he'd drive his wagon, load it down with strawberry shortcakes, and make deliveries. For a full decade, he kept up his work at the Continental Baking Company, moving his way up through the ranks until he reached bakery plant manager. But his big promotion came just as the Great Depression began, and now in his new position, James had a realization. They were losing out on potential sales. Every year, the plant's machinery ground to a halt when strawberries went out of season, and the expensive pans used to make shortcake sat empty. He then realized that if he replaced strawberries with a banana cream filling, then they could make shortcakes all year round. So he did exactly that. The production lines roared back to life, making the new banana-filled shortcakes. Their now famous name came from a billboard. While on a business trip, James passed by a billboard for Twinkie Toe Shoes, a nickname he shortened to Twinkies. James's new product hit the market at a time when stores were boarding up nationwide and families were losing everything. As cannons boomed in Europe, America's soldiers were stationed in Britain and its fleet sailed across the Pacific. America had officially entered the war. Soon after, the US government began rationing a list of foods in short supply to ensure everyone got their fair share. Among the list was a key ingredient of Twinkies: bananas. Without one of his key ingredients, James took a chance. He replaced the banana cream filling with vanilla cream instead. It was a risky move, but it was his only choice. And luckily for him, it paid off. In fact, the new vanilla filling proved so popular that even when bananas were available again, Twinkies never went back. Having survived the Great Depression and the war, Continental then set out to make Twinkies a central part of American culture, beginning with pop culture. Continental cleverly partnered with one of the first children's shows on TV and arguably the most popular of its time, the Howdy Doody show. Not only did the show air ads for Twinkies, but the host, Buffalo Bob, encouraged kids to ask their moms for the shortcakes. Continental was on top of the world, but like all things in life, what goes up eventually comes crashing down. Before we continue on the story of Twinkies, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Ren. If you've listened to the news lately, you may have heard about some of the impacts climate change is having on our world. Specifically, how it has been threatening the future of coffee crops. Ren is a website that makes it easy to keep track of your carbon footprint by answering just a few questions about your lifestyle. Ren even lets you offset it by funding projects to protect the rainforest and plant more trees. Even if you give up driving in favor of walking, cycling, carpooling, and taking public transit to offset your impact, no matter how careful we are, everyone's lifestyle releases some amount of CO2, contributing to our world's climate change. Ren will help you discover more about your carbon footprint, and while no one can reduce their footprint to zero, you can provide a monthly contribution to offset your footprint and receive updates on the projects you support. Given the state of the world, you might want to support the partner projects to give refugees clean cooking fuel or to support indigenous Amazonian groups protecting the rainforest that they call home. Changing the world for a better tomorrow will take a lot of work, but Ren can help us all learn more about our next steps today. Offset your carbon footprint on Ren. The first 100 people to sign up through our link in the description will have an extra 10 trees planted in their name. The 1960s. The world hangs in the balance of the Cold War. Nations are torn between the Soviet Union and the United States, East versus West, and every day, the threat of nuclear war looms over average people, threatening devastation on a global scale. In these uncertain times, the US government urged citizens to duck and cover and prepare for possible nuclear attacks. So, Many built bomb shelters in their backyards or under their homes and stockpiled supplies and food. And as they thought about being stuck in a dark underground concrete room for an uncertain amount of time, scared Americans began looking for food with a long shelf life, and many of them turned to Twinkies. With their claims to stay fresh forever and their sweet, fluffy flavor, Twinkies were an inviting golden treat in a dark time, and Continental decided to ramp up its marketing campaign for Twinkies, starting with a new mascot. Clad in classic cowboy boots and a 10-gallon hat, with a heart-covered handkerchief around the neck and his trusty lasso, Twinkie the Kid had a look that screamed America, and that look was soon recognized nationwide. But Continental had more in store than just a new mascot. They had also struck a deal with comic giants Marvel and DC, a deal that made sure that Twinkies were further tied to American pop culture. Soon, Batman was saving the Twinkies delivery men from an evil brainwashing plot by the Penguin. Thor was distracting Good Run the Golden with golden Twinkie sponge cakes, and Wonder Woman was catching a thief using Twinkies as bait. Twinkies had become as American as apple pie, but the man behind them decided that it was time to step down. 42 years after he had created Twinkies, James Mr. Twinkie Dewar retired from his position as Vice President of Continental. 8 years later, Continental was pumping out Twinkies by the truckload and selling it at the rate of $1 billion annually. Soon after, Continental caught the attention of Ralston Purina, who bought them out for $475 million. Ralston ran Continental for a total of 11 years before selling it to Interstate Bakeries for $560 million. Already a giant in the baking industry, Interstate's merger with Continental made it the largest baking company in the US. However, Interstate would soon learn that their dominance wouldn't be enough to save them from what came next. America's taste took a drastic turn. Beach bods and thin waistlines were in, and sugar was out. The growing popularity of diets like low carb, Atkins, and South Beach spelled disaster for the sugary treat. Sales were slumping, and soon fell flat as Americans took issue with an ingredient list full of calories, sugar, and preservatives that they couldn't pronounce. 6 years later, Twinkies expired. Interstate filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy due to decreased sales, increased ingredient and pension costs, and inefficient delivery systems. But thanks to one powerful fan rooting for the company would unexpectedly emerge from bankruptcy. Senator Charles Schumer of New York personally appealed to a big lender to save Interstate. Ripplewood Holdings paid $130 million to take control of Interstate and renamed it Hostess Brands. Twinkies had just survived the death of their company, but soon they'd have to do it again. Hostess had just risen from the grave, and already they were about to fall back in. Within a mere 3 years of being created, Hostess Brands filed for bankruptcy thanks to its adding debt and selling products at a price that didn't cover costs or return a profit. And months later, employees nationwide went on strike. It was over for the reborn Hostess. The company announced that it would lay off thousands of employees and sell off assets like Twinkies and other well-known brands. When the news got out, headlines across the country reported the death of Twinkies. They flew off store shelves. Americans were outraged, even those who never cared about Twinkies. People raced to stock up before they were gone forever, and boxes of Twinkies even reached $250,000 on eBay. And as Hostess fell apart, another powerful fan thought about how to save America's beloved snack. Andy Dewar, a senior partner at Apollo Global Management, saw the value in the nostalgia attached to a part of American culture like Twinkies. So he reached out to someone who had a reputation for reviving classic brands, Metropolis founder and billionaire Dean Metropolis. Dean was on board, and the two got to work. Fortunately for the two, Hostess went bankrupt in the perfect way for them to take over. Hostess bankruptcy resulted in a 363 asset sale, where a company sells all or part of its assets. This meant that Dean and Andy could buy what they wanted, like Twinkies, while leaving less desirable assets behind, like its inefficient delivery system. Even better for them, they were the only buyers there. Apollo Global Management and Metropolis & Company spent $410 million to buy out Twinkies, Hostess recipes, and 5 Hostess factories. Andy and Dean were on track to bring Twinkies back from the dead and promised to restock Twinkies that year. Then it was time to get to work. The two improved Hostess deliveries in factories, they expanded the Twinkies product line, and they even extended the shelf life from 25 days to 65. And that summer, they made good on their promise. Twinkies hit store shelves again across the US alongside a viral, the sweetest comeback in the history of ever ad campaign. Customers flooded in, snatching them up. Twinkies sold out overnight, bringing in $555 million in revenue. Success was sweet. Andy and Dean successfully revived Hostess and the company began making 1 million Twinkies a day, bringing in $180 million in profit. Then, only 1 year later, the two took Hostess public. The company was valued at $2.3 billion, nearly 5 times what the two had paid for it. Today, Twinkies is recognized as an American icon and sales continue to rise. With the COVID-19 pandemic, more people have been eating at home, once again finding extra comfort in a dark time with their favorite snacks. This is the story of how a wagon driver invented a snack that became an American icon and claims that it would stay fresh forever made it common sight in bomb shelters across the country. This is the story of Twinkies. For more stories about the world's biggest brands, subscribe to Hook and ring the bell so you never miss an episode.